Chapter 4. It is wonderful the way a little town keeps track of itself and of all its units. If every single man and woman, child and baby, acts and conducts itself in a known pattern and breaks no walls and differs with no one and experiments in no way, and is not sick and does not endanger the ease and peace of mind or steady unbroken flow of the town, then that unit can disappear and never be heard of. But let one man step out of the regular thought or the known and trusted pattern, and the nerves of the townspeople ring with nervousness, and communication travels over the nerve lines of the town. Then every unit communicates to the whole. Thus, in La Paz, it was known in the early morning to the whole town that Kino was going to sell his pearl that day. It was known among the neighbors in the bush huts, among the pearl fishermen. It was known among the Chinese grocery store owners. It was known in the church, for the altar boys whispered about it. Word of it crept in among the nuns. The beggars in front of the church spoke of it, for they would be there to take the tithe of the first fruits of the luck. The little boys knew about it with excitement, but most of all, the pearl buyers knew about it. And when the day had come, in the offices of the pearl buyers, each man sat alone with his little black velvet tray, and each man rolled the pearls about with his fingertips and considered his part in the picture. It was supposed that the pearl buyers were individuals, acting alone, bidding against one another for the pearls the fishermen brought in. And once it had been so. But this was a wasteful method, for often in this excitement of bidding for a fine pearl, too great a price had been paid to the fishermen. This was extravagant, and not to be countenanced. Now there was only one pearl buyer with many hands, and the men who sat in their offices waited for Kino knew what price they would offer, how high they would bid, and what method each would use. And although these men would not profit beyond their salaries, there was excitement among the pearl buyers, for there was excitement in the hunt. And if it be a man's function to break down a price, then he must take joy and satisfaction in breaking it as far down as possible. For every man in the world functions to the best of his ability, and no one does less than his best, no matter what he may think about it. Quite apart from any reward they might get, from any word of praise, from any promotion, a pearl buyer was a pearl buyer, and the best and happiest pearl buyer was he who brought for the lowest prices. The sun was hot yellow that morning, and it drew the moisture from the estuary and from the gulf, and hung it in shimmering scarves in the air, so that the air vibrated, and vision was insubstantial. A vision hung in the air, and to the north of the city, the vision of a mountain that was over 200 miles away, and the high slopes of this mountain were swaddled with pines, and a great stone peak arose above the timberline. In the morning of this day, the canoes lay lined up on the beach. The fishermen did not go out to dive for pearls, for there would be too much happening, too many things to see when Kino went to sell the great pearl. In the brush houses by the shore, Kino's neighbors sat long over their breakfasts, and they spoke of what they would do if they had found the pearl. And one man said he would give it as a present to the Holy Father in Rome. Another said he would buy masses. Another said he would buy masses for the souls of his family for 1,000 years. Another thought he might take the money and distribute it among the poor of La Paz. And a fourth thought of all the good things one could do with the money from the pearl, of all the charities, benefits, of all the rescues one could perform if one had money. All of the neighbors hoped that sudden wealth would not turn Kino's head, would not make a rich man of him, would not graft onto him the evil limbs of greed and hatred and coldness. For Kino was a well-liked man. It would be a shame if the pearl destroyed him. That good wife Joanna, they said, and the beautiful baby Coyotito, and others to come. What a pity it would be if the pearl should destroy them all. For Kino and Joanna, this was the morning of mornings of their lives, comparable only to the day when the baby had been born. This was to be the day from which all other days would make their arrangement. Thus they would say, "It was 2 years before we sold the pearl," or "It was 6 weeks after we sold the pearl." Joanna, considering the matter, threw caution to the winds as she dressed Coyotito in clothes she had prepared for his baptism, when there would be money for his baptism. And Joanna combed and braided her hair and tied the ends with 2 little bows of red ribbon, and she put on her marriage skirt and waist. The sun was quarter high when they were ready. Kino's ragged white clothes were clean at last, and this was the last day of his raggedness. For tomorrow, or even this afternoon, he would have new clothes. The neighbors, watching Kino's door through the crevices in their bush houses, were dressed and ready too. There was no self-consciousness about their joining Kino and Joanna to go pearl selling. It was expected. It was a historic moment. They would be crazy if they didn't go. It would be almost a sign of unfriendship. Joanna put on her head shawl carefully, and draped one long end under her right elbow, and gathered it with her right hand so that the hammock hung under her arm. And in this little hammock she placed Coyotito, propped up against the hedge shawl, so that he could see everything and perhaps remember. Kino put on his large straw hat, and felt it with his hand to see it was properly placed, not on the back or side of his head, like a rash, unmarried, irresponsible man, and not flat as an elder would wear it, but tilted a little forward to show aggressiveness and seriousness and vigor. This is a great deal to be seen in the tilt of a hat on a man. Kino slipped his feet into his sandals and put the thongs up over his heels. The great pearl was wrapped in an old soft piece of deerskin and placed in a little leather bag. The leather bag was in a pocket in Kino's shirt. He folded his blanket carefully and draped it in a narrow strip over his left shoulder. And now they were ready. Kino stepped with dignity out of his house, and Joanna followed him, carrying Coyotito. As they marched up the fresh-washed alley towards the town, the neighbors joined them. The houses belched people, the doorways spewed out children. But because of the seriousness of the occasion, only one man walked with Kino, and that was his brother, Juan Thomas. Juan Thomas cautioned his brother. "You must be careful to see they do not cheat you," he said, and "very careful." Kino agreed. "We do not know what prices are paid in other places," said Juan Thomas. "How can we know what is a fair price if we do not know what the pearl buyers gets for the pearl of another place?" "That is true," said Kino. "And how can we know? We are here, and we are not there." As they walked towards the city, the crowd grew behind them, and Juan Thomas, in pure nervousness, went on speaking. "Before you were born, Kino," he said, "the old ones thought of a way to get more money for their pearls. They thought it would be better if they had an agent who took all the pearls to the capital and sold them there and kept only his share of the profit." Kino nodded his head. "I know," he said. "It was a good thought." "And so they got such a man," said Juan Thomas, "and they pooled their pearls, and they started him off. He was never heard of again, and the pearls were lost. Then they got another man and started him off, and he was never heard of again. And so they gave the whole thing up and went back to the old way." "I know," said Kino. "I've heard our father tell it. It was a good idea, but it is against religion, and the father made that very clear. The loss of the pearl was a punishment visited on those who tried to leave their sanction, and the father made it clear that each man and woman is like a soldier sent by God to guard some part of the castle of the universe. And some are in the ramparts, and some far deep in the darkness of the walls, but each one must remain faithful to his post, and must not go running about, else the castle is in danger from the assaults of hell." "I've heard him make that sermon," said Juan Thomas. "He makes it every year." The brothers, as they walked along, squinted their eyes a little, as they and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers had done for 400 years, since the first of the strangers came with an argument and authority and gunpowder to back up both. And in the 400 years, Kino's people had learned only one defense, a slight slitting of the eyes and a slight tightening of the lips, and a retirement. Nothing could break down this wall, and they could remain whole within the wall. The gathering procession was solemn, for they sensed the importance of this day, and any children who showed a tendency to scuffle, to scream, to cry out, to steal hats and rumple hair, were hissed to silence by their elders. So important was this day that an old man came up to see, riding on the stalwart shoulders of his nephew. The procession left the brush huts and entered the stone and plaster city, where the streets were a little wider, and there were narrow pavements beside the buildings. And as before, the beggars joined them as they passed the church. The grocers looked out at them as they went by. The little saloons lost their customers, and the owners closed up shop and went along. And the sun beat down on the streets of the city. Even tiny stones threw shadows on the ground. The news of the approach of the procession ran ahead of it, and in their little dark offices the pearl buyers stiffened and grew alert. They got out their papers so that they could be at work while Kino appeared, and they put their pearls in the desks, for it is not good to let an inferior pearl be seen besides a beauty. And word of the loveliness of Kino's pearl had come to them. The pearl buyers' offices were clustered together in one narrow street, and they were barred at the windows, and wooden slats cut out the light so that only a soft gloom entered the offices. A stout, slow man sat in an office waiting. His face was fatherly and benign. His eyes twinkled with friendship. He was a caller of good mornings, a ceremonious shaker of hands, a jolly man who knew all jokes, and yet hovered close to sadness. For in the midst of a laugh he could remember the death of your aunt, and his eyes could become wet with sorrow for your loss. This morning he had placed a flower in a vase on his desk, a single scarlet hibiscus, and the vase sat beside the black velvet-lined pearl tray in front of him. He was shaved close to the blue roots of his beard, and his hands were clean and his nails polished. His door stood open to the morning, and he hummed under his breath while his right hand practiced legerdemain. He rolled a coin back and forth over his knuckles, and made it appear and disappear, made it spin and sparkle. The coin winked into sight as quickly slipped out of sight, and the man did not even watch his own performance. The fingers did it all mechanically, precisely, while the man hummed to himself and peered out the door. Then he heard the tramp of feet in the approaching crowd, and the fingers of his right hand worked faster and faster, until, as the figure of Kino filled the doorway, the coin flashed and disappeared. "Good morning, my friend," the stout man said. "What can I do for you?" Kino stared into the dimness of the little office, for his eyes were squeezed from the outside glare. But the buyer's eyes had become as steady and cruel and winking as a hawk's eyes, while the rest of his face smiled in greeting. And secretly, behind his desk, his right hand practiced the coin. "I have a pearl," said Kino, and Juan Thomas stood beside him and snorted a little at the understatement. The neighbors peered around the doorway, and a line of little boys clambered on the window bars and looked through. Several little boys on their hands and knees watched the scene around Kino's legs. "You have a pearl?" the dealer said. "Sometimes a man brings in a dozen. Well, let us see your pearl. We will value it and give you the best price." And his fingers worked furiously with the coin. Now Kino knew his own dramatic effects. Slowly, he brought out the leather bag. Slowly, took from it the soft and dirty piece of deerskin, and then he let the great pearl roll onto the black velvet tray, and instantly his eyes went to the buyer's face. But there was no sign, no movement. The face did not change, but the secret hand behind the desk missed its precision. The coin stumbled over a knuckle and slipped silently into the dealer's lap, and the fingers behind the desk curled into a fist. When the right hand came out of hiding, the forefinger touched the great pearl, rolled it on the black velvet. Thumb and forefinger picked it up and brought it near to the dealer's eyes and twirled it in the air. Kino held his breath, and the neighbors held their breath, and the whispering went back through the crowd. "He's inspecting it. No price has been mentioned. They have not come to a price." Now the dealer's hand had become a personality. The hand tossed the giant pearl back in the tray. The forefinger poked and insulted it, and on the dealer's face there came a sad and contemptuous smile. "I'm sorry, my friend," he said, and his shoulders rose to indicate that the misfortune was no fault of his. "It is a pearl of great value," Kino said. The dealer's fingers spurned the pearl so it bounced and rebounded softly on the side of the velvet tray. "You have heard of fool's gold," the dealer said. "This pearl is like fool's gold. It is too large. Who would buy it? There is no market for such things. It is a curiosity only. I am sorry. You thought it was a thing of value, and it is only a curiosity." Now Kino's face was perplexed and worried. "It is the pearl of the world," he cried. "No one has ever seen such a pearl." "On the contrary," said the dealer, "it is large and clumsy. As a curiosity, it has no interest. Some museum might perhaps take it to place in a collection of seashells. I can give you, say, 1,000 pesos. Kino's face grew dark and dangerous. "It is worth 50,000, he said. "You know it. You want to cheat me." And the dealer heard a little grumble go through the crowd as they heard the price. And the dealer felt a little tremor of fear. "Do not blame me," he said quickly. "I am only an appraiser. Ask the others. Go to their offices and show them your pearl. Or better, let them come here, so that you can see that there is no collusion. Boy," he called. When his servant looked at the door, "Boy, go to such a one, and such another one, and such a third one. Ask them to step in here, and do not tell them why. Just say that I will be pleased to see them." And his right hand went behind the desk and pulled another coin from his pocket, and the coin rolled back and forth over the knuckles. Kino's neighbors whispered together. They had been afraid of something like this. The pearl was large, but it had a strange color. They had been suspicious of it from the first. After all, 1,000 pesos would not be thrown away. It was a comparative wealth to a man who was not wealthy. And suppose Kino took 1,000 pesos. Only yesterday he had nothing. But Kino had grown tight and hard. He felt the creeping of fate, the circling of wolves, the hover of vultures. He felt the evil coagulating about him, and he was helpless to protect himself. He heard in his ears the evil music, and on the black velvet the great pearl glistened, so that the dealer could not keep his eyes from it. The crowd in the doorway wavered and broke and let the 3 pearl dealers through. The crowd was silent now, fearing to miss a word, to fail to see a gesture or an expression. Kino was silent and watchful. He felt a little tugging at his back, and he turned to look in Joanna's eyes, and when he looked away, he had renewed strength. The dealers did not glance at one another, nor at the pearl. The man behind the desk said, "I put a value on the pearl. The owner here does not think it fair. I will ask you to examine this thing, and make an offer. Notice," he said to Kino, "I have not mentioned what I have offered." The first dealer, dry and stringy, seemed now to see the pearl for the first time. He took it up, rolled it quickly between his thumb and forefinger, then cast it contemptuously back on the tray. "Do not include me in this discussion," he said dryly. "I will make no offer at all. I do not want it. It is not a pearl, it is a monstrosity." His thin lips curled. Now the second dealer, a little man with a shy, soft voice, took the pearl, and he examined it carefully. He took a glass from his pocket and inspected it under magnification. Then he laughed softly. "Better pearls are made of paste," he said. "I know these things. This is soft and chalky. It will lose its color and die in only a few months. Look." He offered the glass to Kino, showed him how to use it, and Kino, who had never seen a pearl's surface magnified, was shocked at the strange-looking surface. The third dealer took the pearl from Kino's hands. "One of my clients likes such things," he said. "I will offer 500 pesos, and perhaps I can sell it to my client for 6. Kino reached quickly and snatched the pearl from his hand. He wrapped it in the deerskin and thrust it inside his shirt. The man behind the desk said, "I'm a fool, I know, but my first offer stands. I will offer 1,000. "What are you doing?" he asked as Kino thrust the pearl out of sight. "I'm cheated," Kino cried fiercely. "My pearl is not for sale here. I will go, perhaps even to the capital." Now the dealers glanced quickly at one another. They knew they had played too hard. They knew they would be disciplined for their failure. The man at the desk said quickly, "I might go to 1,500. But Kino was pushing his way through the crowd. The hum of talk came to him dimly. His rage blood pounded in his ears, and he burst through and strode away. Joanna followed, trotting after him. When the evening came, the neighbors in the brush houses sat eating their corn cakes and beans, and they discussed the great theme of the morning. They did not know, it seemed, a fine pearl to them. They had never seen such a pearl before, and surely the dealers knew more about the value of pearls than they. "And mark this," they said, "those dealers did not discuss these things. Each of the 3 knew the pearl was valueless." "But suppose they had arranged it before? If that is so, then all of us have been cheated of our lives." Perhaps, some argued, perhaps it would have been better if Kino took the 1,500 pesos. That is a great deal of money, more than he has ever seen. Maybe Kino is being a pig-headed fool. Suppose he should really go to the capital and find no buyer for his pearl. He would never live that down. "And now," said other fearful ones, "now that he defiled them, those buyers will not want to deal with him at all. Maybe Kino has cut off his own head and destroyed himself." And others said, "Kino was a brave man and a fierce man. He's right. For his courage, we may all profit. They were proud of Kino. In his house, Kino squatted in his sleeping mat, brooding. He had buried his pearl under a stone of the fire hole in his house, stared at the woven trills of his sleeping mat until the cross design danced in his head. He had lost one world and not gained another, and Kino was afraid. Never in his life had he been so far from home. He was afraid of strangers and of strange places. He was terrified of that monster of strangeness they called the capital. It lay over the water and through the mountains, over 1,000 miles, and every strange, terrible mile was frightening. But Kino had lost his old world, and he must clamber onto a new one. For his dream of the future was real, and never to be destroyed. And he had said, "I will go." And that made a real thing too. To determine to go, and to say it, was to be halfway there. Ioana watched him while he buried his pearl, and she watched him while she cleaned Coyotito and nursed him, and Ioana made the corn cakes for supper. Juan Thomas came in and squatted down beside Kino, and remained silent for a long time, until at last Kino demanded, "What else could I do? They're all cheats." Juan Thomas nodded gravely. He was the elder, and Kino looked to him for wisdom. "It is hard to know," he said. "We do know that we are cheated from birth, to the overcharge on our coffins, but we survive. You have defied not the pearl buyers, but the whole structure, the whole way of life, and I am afraid for you." "What have I to fear but starvation?" Kino asked. But Juan Thomas shook his head slowly. "That we must all fear. But suppose you are correct. Suppose your pearl is of great value. Do you think then the game is over?" "What do you mean?" "I don't know," said Juan Thomas, "but I am afraid for you. It is new ground you are walking on. You do not know the way." "I will go. I will go soon," said Kino. "Yes," Juan Thomas agreed. "That you must do. But I wonder if you will find it any different in the capital. Here you have friends, and me, your brother. There you will have no one." "What else can I do?" Kino cried. "Some deep outrage is here. My son must have a chance. That is why we are striking at it. My friends will protect me." "Only so long as you are not in danger or get discomfort from it," said Juan Thomas. He arose, saying, "Go with God." And Kino said, "Go with God," and did not even look up, for the words had a strange chill in them. Long after Juan Thomas had gone, Kino sat brooding on his sleeping mat. A lethargy had settled upon him, and a little gray hopelessness. Every road seemed blocked against him. In his head he heard only the dark music of the enemy. His senses were burningly alive, and his mind went back to the deep participation with all things, the gift he had from his people. He heard every little sound of the gathering at night, the sleepy complaint of settling birds, the love agony of cats, the strike and withdrawal of little waves on the beach, and the simple hiss of distance. And he could smell the sharp odor of exposed kelp from the receding tide. The little flare of the twig fire made the design on his sleeping mat jump before his entranced eyes. Ioana watched him with worry, but she knew him, and she knew she could help him best by being silent, by being near. And as though she too could hear the song of evil, she fought it, singing softly the melody of the family, of the safety and warmth and wholeness of the family. She held Coyotito in her arms and sang the song to him, to keep the evil out, and her voice was brave against the threat of the dark music. Kino did not move nor ask for his supper. She knew he would ask when he wanted it. His eyes were entranced, and he could sense the wary, watchful evil outside the brush house. He could feel the dark creeping things waiting for him to go out into the night. It was a shadowy and dreadful, and yet it called to him, and threatened him, and challenged him. His right hand went to his shirt and felt his knife. His eyes were wide. He stood up and walked to the doorway. Ioana willed him to stop. She raised her hand to stop him, and her mouth opened with terror. For a long moment, Kino looked out into the darkness, and then he stepped outside. Ioana heard the little rush, the grunting struggle, one blow. She froze with terror for a moment, and then her lips grew back from her teeth like a cat's lips, She set Coyotito on the ground. She seized a stone from the fireplace and rushed outside. But it was over by then. Kino lay on the ground, struggling to rise. There was no one near him. Only the shadows and the strike and rush of waves and the hiss of distance. But the evil was all about, hidden behind the brush fence, crouched beside the house in shadow, hovering in the air. Joanna dropped her stone, and she put her arms around Kino and helped him to his feet, and supported him into the house. Blood oozed down from his scalp, and there was a long, deep cut in his cheek from ear to chin, a deep, bleeding slash. And Kino was only half conscious. He shook his head from side to side. His shirt was torn open, and his clothes half pulled off. Joanna sat him down on a sleeping mat as she wiped the thickening blood from his face with her skirt. She brought him pleak to drink in a little pitcher, and still he shook his head to clear out the darkness. "Who?" Joanna asked. "I don't know," Kino said. "I didn't see." Now Joanna brought her clay pot of water, and she washed the cut off his face, and he stared dazed ahead of him. "Kino, my husband," she cried, and his eyes stared past her. "Kino, can you hear me?" "I hear you," he said dully. "Kino, this pearl is evil. Let us destroy it before it destroys us. Let us crush it between two stones. Let us throw it back in the sea where it belongs. Kino, it is evil, it is evil." And as she spoke, the light came back in Kino's eyes, so they glowed fiercely, and his muscles hardened over, and his will hardened. "No," he said. "I will fight this thing. I will win over it. We will have our chance." His fist pounded the sleeping mat. "No one shall take our good fortune from us," he said. His eyes softened then, and he raised a gentle hand to Joanna's shoulder. "Believe me," he said, "I am a man." And his face grew crafty. "In the morning we will take our canoe, and we will go over the sea and over the mountains to the capital, you and I. We will not be cheated. I am a man." "Kino," she said huskily, "I am afraid. A man can be killed. Let us throw the pearl back into the sea." "Hush," he said fiercely. "I am a man. Hush." And she was silent, for his voice was command. "Let us sleep a little," he said. "And the first light we will start. You are not afraid to go with me?" "No, my husband." His eyes were soft and warm on her then. His hand touched her cheek. "Let us sleep a little," he said. Chapter 5. The late moon arose before the first rooster crowed. Kino opened his eyes in the darkness, for he sensed movement near him, but he did not move. Only his eyes searched the darkness, and in the pale light of the moon that crept through the holes in the brush house, Kino saw Joanna arise silently from beside him. He saw her move towards the fireplace. So carefully did she work that he heard only the lightest sound when she moved the fireplace stone, and then like a shadow she glided towards the door. She paused for a moment beside the hanging box where Coyotito lay. Then for a second she was black in the doorway, and then she was gone. And rage surged in Kino. He rolled up to his feet and followed her as silently as she had gone. And he could hear her quick footsteps going towards the shore. Quietly he tracked her, and his brain was red with anger. She burst clear of the brush line and stumbled a little over the boulders towards the water. And then she heard him coming and broke into a run. Her arm was up to throw when he leapt at her and caught her arm and wrenched the pearl from her. He struck her in the face with his clenched fist, and she fell among the boulders, and he kicked her in the side. In the pale light he could see the little waves break over her, and her skirt floated about and clung to her legs as the water receded. Kino looked down at her, and his teeth were bared. He hissed at her like a snake, and Joanna stared at him with wide, unfrightened eyes, like a sheep before the butcher. She knew there was murder in him, and that it was all right. She had accepted it, and she would not resist or even protest. And then the rage left him, and a sick disgust took its place. He turned away from her and walked up the beach and through the brush line. His senses were dulled by his emotion. He heard the rush, got his knife out, and lunged at one dark figure and felt his knife go home. And then he was swept to his knees and swept again to the ground. Greedy fingers went through his clothes, frantic fingers searched him. The pearl, knocked from his hand, lay winking behind a little stone in the pathway. It glinted in the soft moonlight. Ioana dragged herself up from the rocks on the edge of the water. Her face was a dull pain and her side ached. She steadied herself on her knees for a while, and her wet skirt clung to her. There was no anger in her for Kino. He had said, "I am a man," and that meant certain things to Ioana. It meant that he was half insane and half god. It meant that Kino would drive his strength against the mountain and plunge his strength against the sea. Ioana, in her woman's soul, knew that the mountain would stand while the man broke himself, that the sea would surge while the man drowned in it. And yet it was this thing that made him a man, half insane and half a god. And Ioana had need of a man. She could not live without a man. Although she might be puzzled by these differences between man and woman, she knew them and accepted them and needed them. Of course she would follow him, there was no question of that. Sometimes the quality of woman, the reason, the caution, the sense of preservation, could cut through Kino's madness and save them all. She climbed painfully to her feet, and she dipped her cupped palms into the waves and washed her bruised face with the stinging salt water, and then went creeping up to the beach after Kino. A flight of herring clouds had moved over the sky from the south. The pale moon dipped in and out of the strands of clouds so that Ioana walked in darkness for a moment, and in light the next. Her back was bent with pain, her head was low. She went to the line of the brush where the moon was covered, and when it looked though she saw the glimmer of the great pearl in the path behind the rock, she sank to her knees and picked it up, and the moon went into the darkness of the clouds again. Ioana remembered on her knees while she considered whether to go back to the sea and finish her job, and as she considered, the light came again, and she saw two dark figures lying on the path ahead of her. She leaped forward and saw that one was Kino, and the other a stranger with dark, shiny fluid leaking from his throat. Kino moved sluggishly, arms and legs stirred like those of a crushed bug, and a thick muttering came from his mouth. Now in an instant, Ioana knew that the old life was gone forever. A dead man in the path, and Kino's knife, dark, bladed beside him, convinced her. All of the time Ioana had been trying to rescue something of the old peace, of the time before the pearl, but now it was gone, and there was no retrieving it. And knowing this, she abandoned the past instantly. There was nothing to do but to save themselves. Her pain was gone now, her slowness. Quickly she dragged the dead man from the pathway to the shelter of the brush. She went to Kino and sponged his face with her wet skirt. His senses were coming back, and he moaned. "They have taken the pearl. I have lost it. Now it is over," he said. The pearl is gone. Ioana quieted him, as she would quiet a sick child. "Hush," she said. "Here is your pearl. I found it in the path. Can you hear me now? Here is your pearl. Can you understand? You have killed a man. We must go away. They will come for us. Can you understand? We must be gone before the daylight comes. I was attacked," Kino said uneasily. "I struck to save myself." "Do you remember yesterday?" Ioana asked. "Do you think that will matter? Do you remember the men of the city? Do you think your explanation will help?" Kino drew a great breath and fought off his weakness. "No," he said, "you are right." And his will hardened, and he was a man again. "Go to our house and bring Coyotito," he said, "and bring all the corn we have. I will drag the canoe into the water, and we will go." He took his knife and left her. He stumbled towards the beach and came to his canoe. And when the light broke through again, he saw the great hole had been knocked in the bottom, and a searing rage came to him and gave him strength. Now the darkness was closing in on him and his family. Now the evil music filled the night, hung over the mangroves, skirled and the wave beat. The canoe of his grandfather, placid over and over, had a splintered hole broken into it. This was an evil beyond thinking. The killing of a man was not so evil as the killing of a boat, for a boat does not have sons, and a boat cannot protect itself, and a wounded boat does not heal. There was sorrow in Kino's rage, but this last thing had tightened him beyond breaking. He was an animal now, for hiding, for attacking, for he had lived only to preserve himself and his family. He was not conscious of the pain in his head. He leaped up at the beach, through the brush line towards his brush house, and it did not occur to him to take one of the canoes of his neighbors. Never once did the thought enter his head, any more than he could have conceived breaking a boat. The roosters were crowing, and the dawn was not far off. Smoke of the first fire seeped through the walls of the brush houses, and the first smell of cooking corn cakes was in the air. Already the dawn birds were scampering in the bushes. The weak moon was losing its light, and the clouds thickened and curdled to the southward. The wind blew freshly in the estuary, a nervous, restless wind, with the smell of the storm on its breath, and there was a change and uneasiness in the air. Kino, hurrying towards his house, felt a surge of exhilaration. Now he was not confused, for there were only one thing to do, and in Kino's hand went first to the great pearl in his shirt, and then to his knife hanging under his shirt. He saw a little glow ahead of him, and then without interval a tall flame leaped up in the dark, and a crackling roar. A tall edifice of fire lightened the pathway. Kino broke into a run, and it was his brush house, he knew, and he knew that those houses could burn down in a very few moments. And as he ran, a scuttling figure ran towards him, Joanna, with Coyotito in her arms, and Kino's shoulder blanket clutched in her hand. The baby moaned with fright, and Joanna's eyes were wide and terrified. Kino could see the house was gone, but he did not question Joanna. He knew, but she said it was torn up, and the floor dug. Even the baby's box turned out. And as I looked out, they put the fire to the outside. The fierce light of the burning house lightened Kino's face strongly. Who? He demanded. I don't know, she said. The dark ones. The neighbors were trembling from their houses now, as they watched the falling sparks and stamped them out to save their own houses. Suddenly, Kino was afraid. The light made him afraid. He remembered the man lying dead in the brush beside the path, and he took Joanna by the arm and drew her into the shadow of a house, away from the light, for light was danger to him. For a moment he considered, and then he worked among the shadows until he came to the house of Juan Thomas, his brother, and he slipped into the doorway and drew Joanna after him. Outside he could hear the squeal of children and the shouts of the neighbors, for his friends thought he might be inside the burning house. The house of Juan Thomas was almost exactly like Kino's. Nearly all the brush houses were alike, and all leaped light in the air, so that Joanna and Kino, sitting in the corner of the brother's house, could see the leaping flames of the wall. They saw the flames tall and furious. They saw the roof fall and watched the fire die down as quickly as a twig fire dies. They heard the cries of warning from their friends, and the shrill, keening cry of Paulina, wife of John Thomas. She, being the nearest woman relative, raised a formal lament for the dead of the family. Alpino realized that she was wearing her second-best head shawl and rushed to her house to get her fine new one. As she rummaged in a box by the wall, Kino's voice said quietly, Apollina, do not cry out, we are not hurt. How did you come here? She demanded. Do not question, he said. Go now to Juan Thomas and bring him here, and tell no one else. This is important to us, Alpina. She paused, her hands helpless in front of her, and then, yes, my brother-in-law, she said. In a few moments, Juan Thomas came back with her. He lighted a candle and came to them where they crouched in the corner and said, Apollina, see to the door. Do not let anyone enter. He was older, Juan Thomas, and he assumed the authority. Now, my brother, he said. I was attacked in the dark, said Kino, and in the fight I have killed a man. Who? Asked Juan Thomas quickly. I do not know. It is all darkness, and shape of darkness. It is the pearl, said Juan Thomas. There is a devil in this pearl. You should have sold it and passed on this devil. Perhaps you can still sell it and buy peace for yourself. And Kino said, Oh, my brother, an insult has been put on me that is deeper than my life. For on the beach my canoe is broken, my house is burned, and in the brush a dead man lies. Every escape is cut off. You must hide us, my brother. And Kino, looking closely, saw deep worry come into his brother's eyes, and he forestalled him in a possible refusal. Not for long, he said quickly. Only till a day has passed, and the new night has come. Then we will go. I will hide you, said Juan Thomas. I do not want to bring danger to you, said Kino. I know I am like a leper. I will go tonight, and then you will be safe. I will protect you, said Juan Thomas, and he called, Apollina, close up the door. Do not even whisper that Kino is here. They sat silently all day in the darkness of the house, and they could hear the neighbors speaking to them. Through the walls of the house, they could watch their neighbors raking through the ashes to find the bones. Crouching in the house of Juan Thomas, they heard the shock go into the neighbors' minds at the news of the broken boat. Juan Thomas went out among the neighbors to divert their suspicions, and he gave them theories and ideas what had happened to Kino, and to Joanna, and to the baby. To one he said, I think they have gone south along the coast to escape the evil that was once on them. And to another, Kino would never leave the sea. Perhaps he found another boat. And he said, Apollina is ill with grief. And in that day the wind rose up to beat the gulf and tore the kelps and weeds that lined the shore, and the wind cried through the brush houses, and no boat was safe on the water. Then Juan Thomas told among the neighbors, Kino is gone. If he went to the sea, he is drowned by now. And after each trip among the neighbors, Juan Thomas came back with something borrowed. He brought a little woven straw bag of red beans and a gourd full of rice. He borrowed a cup of dried peppers and a block of salt. He brought in a long working knife, 18 inches long and heavy. It is a small axe, a tool and a weapon. And when Kino saw this knife, his eyes lightened up, for he fondled the blade with his thumb and tested at the edge. The wind screamed over the gulf and turned the water white, and the mangroves plunged like frightened cattle, and a fine sandy dust arose from the land and hung in a stifling cloud over the sea. The wind drove off the clouds and skimmed the sky clean and drifted the sand of the country like snow. Then Juan Thomas, when the evening approached, talked long with his brother. Where will you go? To the north, said Kino. I have heard that there are cities in the north. Avoid the shore, said Juan Thomas. They are making a party to search the shore. The men in the city will look for you. Do you still have the pearl? I have it, said Kino, and I will keep it. I might have given it as a gift, but now it is my misfortune and my life, and I will keep it. His eyes were hard and cruel and bitter. Coyotito whimpered, and Joanna muttered little magics over him to make him silent. The wind is good, said Juan Thomas. There will be no tracks. They left quickly in the dark before the moon had risen. The family stood formally in the house of Juan Thomas. Joanna carried Coyotito on her back, covered and held in her head shawl, and the baby slept, cheek turned sideways against her shoulder. The head shawl covered the baby, and one end of it came across Joanna's nose to protect her from the evil night air. Juan Thomas embraced his brother with a double embrace, kissed him on both cheeks. Go with God, he said, and it was like death. You will not give up the pearl. The pearl has become my soul, said Kino. If I give it up, I shall lose my soul. Go thou also with God. Chapter 6. The wind blew fierce and strong, and it pelted them with bits of sticks, sand, and little rocks. Joanna and Kino gathered their clothing tighter around them and covered their noses and went out into the world. The sky was brushed clean by the wind, and the stars were cold in the black sky. The two walked carefully, and they avoided the center of the town where some sleeper in a doorway might see them pass. For the town closed itself in against the night, and anyone who moved about in the darkness would be noticeable. Kino threaded his way around the edge of the city and turned north by the stars, and found the rutted, sandy road that led through the brushy country towards Loreto, where the miraculous Virgin was her station. Kino could feel the blown sand against his ankles, and he was glad, for he knew there would be no tracks. The little light from the stars made out for him the narrow road through the brushy country, and Kino could hear the pad of Joanna's feet behind him. He went quickly and quietly, and Joanna trotted beside him to keep up. Some ancient thing stirred in Kino. Through his fear of dark and the devils that haunt the night, there came a rush of exhilaration. Some animal thing was moving in him, so that he was cautious and wary and dangerous. Some ancient thing out of the past of his people was alive in him. The wind was at his back, and the stars guided him. The wind cried and whisked in the brush, and the family went on monotonously, hour after hour. They passed no one and saw no one. At last, to their right, the waning moon arose, and when it came up, the wind died down, and the land was still. Now they could see the little road ahead of them, deep cut with sand-drifted wheel tracks. With the wind gone, there would be footprints. but they would be a good distance from the town, and perhaps their tracks might not be noticed. Kino walked carefully in a wheel rut, and Joanna followed in his path. One big cart, going to the town in the morning, could wipe out every trace of their passage. All night they walked, and never changed their pace. Once Coyotito awakened, and Joanna shifted him in front of her and soothed him until he went to sleep again. And the evils of the night were about them. The coyotes cried and laughed in the brush. The owls screeched and hissed over their heads. And once some large animal lumbered away, crackling the young undergrowth as it went, and Kino gripped the handle of his big working knife, took a sense of protection from it. The music of the pearl was triumphant in Kino's head, and the quiet melody of the family underlay it, and they wove themselves into the soft padding of sandaled feet in the dust. All night they walked, and in the first dawn Kino searched the roadside for a covert to lie in during the day. He found his place near to the road, a little clearing where a deer might have lain, and it was curtained thickly with the dry, brittle trees that lined the road. And when Joanna had seated herself and had settled to nurse the baby, Kino went back to the road. He broke a branch and carefully swept the footprints where they had turned from the roadway. And then, in first light, he heard the creak of a wagon, and he crouched beside the road and watched a heavy two-wheeled cart go by, drawn by slouching oxen. And when it had passed out of his sight, he went back to the roadway and looked at the rut and found the footprints were gone. And again he swept out his tracks and went back to Joanna. She gave him the soft corn cakes Alapina had packed for them, and after a while she slept a little. But Kino sat on the ground and stared at the earth in front of him. He watched the ants moving, a little column of them near his foot. He placed his foot in their path, and the column climbed over his instep and continued on its way. And Kino left his foot there and watched them move over it. The sun arose hotly. They were not near the gulf now, and the air was dry and hot, so that the brush crickled with heat, and a good resinous smell came from it. And when Joanna awakened, when the sun was high, Kino told her things she already knew. "Beware of that kind of tree there," he said, pointing. "Do not touch it, for if you do, and then touch your eyes, it will blind you. And beware of the tree that bleeds. See that one over there? For if you break it, the red blood will flow from it, and it is evil luck." And she nodded and smiled a little at him, for she knew these things. "Will they follow us?" she asked. "Do you think they will try to find us?" "They will try," said Kino. "Whoever finds us will take the pearl. Oh, they will try." And Joanna said, "Perhaps the dealers were right, and the pearl has no value. Perhaps this has all been an illusion." Kino reached into his clothes and brought out the pearl. He let the sun play on it until it burned his eyes. "No," he said. "They would not have tried to steal it if it had been valueless." "Do you know who attacked you? Was it the dealers?" "I do not know," he said. "I didn't see them." He looked into his pearl to find his vision. "When we sell it at last, I will have a rifle," he said, and he looked in the shining surface for his rifle. But he saw only a huddled dark body on the ground with shining blood dripping from his throat. And he said quickly, "We will be married in a great church." And in the pearl he saw Joanna with her beaten face crawling home from the night. "Our son must learn to read," he frantically said. And there in the pearl was Coyotito's face, thick and feverish from medicine. And Kino thrust the pearl back into its clothing. The music of the pearl had become sinister in his ears, and it's interwoven with the music of evil. The hot sun beat on the earth so that Kino and Joanna moved into the lacy shade of the brush, and small gray birds scampered on the ground in the shade. In the heat of the day, Kino relaxed and covered his eyes with his hat and wrapped his blanket around his face to keep the flies off, and he slept. But Joanna did not sleep. She sat quiet as a stone, and her face was quiet. Her mouth was still swollen, where Kino had struck her, and big flies buzzed around the cut on her chin. But she sat as still as a sentinel. And when Coyotito awakened, she placed him on the ground in front of her and watched him wave his arms and kick his feet. And he smiled and gurgled at her until she smiled too. She picked up a little twig from the ground and tickled him, and she gave him water from the gourd she carried in her bottle. Kino stirred in a dream, and he cried out in a guttural voice, and his hand moved in symbolic fighting. And then he moaned and sat up suddenly, his eyes wide and nostrils flaring. He listened and heard only the clicking heat and the hiss of distance. "What is it?" Joanna asked. Hush, he said. You were dreaming. Perhaps. But he was restless, and when she gave him a corn cake from her store, he paused in his chewing to listen. He was uneasy and nervous. He glanced over his shoulder. He lifted the big knife and felt the edge. When Coyotito gurgled on the ground, Kino said, Keep him quiet. What is the matter? Joanna asked. I don't know. He listened again, an animal light in his eyes. He stood up then, silently, and crouched low, threaded his way through the brush to the road. He did not step into the road. He crept into the cover of a thorny tree and peered out along the way he had come. And then he saw them moving along. His body stiffened as he drew down his head and peered out from under a fallen branch. In the distance he could see three figures, 2 on foot and 1 on horseback. But he knew what they were, and a chill of fear went through him. Even in the distance he could see 2 on foot moving slowly along, bent low to the ground. Here one would pause and look at the earth, while the other joined him. They were the trackers. They could follow the trail of a bighorn sheep in the stone mountains. They were as sensitive as hounds. Here he and Joanna might have stepped out to the wheel rut, and these people from the inland, these hunters, could follow, could read a broken straw or a little tumbled pile of dust. Behind them on horse was a dark man, his nose covered with a blanket, and across his saddle a rifle gleamed in the sun. Kino lay as rigid as a tree limb. He barely breathed, and his eyes went to the place where he had swept out the track. Even the sweeping might be a message to the trackers. He knew these inland hunters. In a country where there was little game, they managed to live because of their ability to hunt. They were hunting him. They scuttled over the ground like animals and found a sign and crouched over it, while the horsemen waited. The trackers whined a little, like excited dogs on a warming trail. Kino slowly drew his big knife to his hand and made it ready. He knew what he must do. If the trackers found the swept place, he must leap for the horseman, kill him quickly, and take the rifle. That was his only chance in the world. And as the three drew near to the road, Kino dug little pits with his sandaled toes so that he could leap without warning, so that his feet would not slip. He had only a little vision under his fallen limb. Now Joanna, back in her hidden place, had heard the pad of the horse's hooves, and Coyotito gurgled. She took him up quickly and put him under her shawl and gave him her breast, and he was silent. When the trackers came near, Kino could see only their legs, and only the legs of the horse from under the fallen branch. He saw the dark, horny feet of the men, in their ragged white clothes, and he had heard the crack of leather, of the saddle and the clink of spurs. The trackers stopped at the swept place and studied it. The horseman stopped. The horse flung its head up against the bit roller clicked under his tongue, and the horse snorted. Then the dark trackers turned and studied the horse, and watched his ears. Kino was not breathing, but his back arched a little, and the muscles of his arms and legs stood out with tension, and a line of sweat formed on his upper lip. For a long moment the trackers bent over the road, and then they moved on, slowly, studying the ground ahead of them, and the horsemen moved after them. The trackers scuttled along, stopping, looking, and hurrying on. They would be back, Kino knew. They would be circling, searching, peeping, stooping. They would come back sooner or later to his covered track. He slid backwards and did not bother to cover his tracks. He could not. Too many little signs were there, too many broken twigs and scuffled places and displaced stones. And there was panic in Kino now, a panic of flight. The trackers would find his trail, he knew it. There was no escape, except in flight. He edged away from the road and went quickly and silently to the hidden place where Joanna was. She looked up at him in question. Trackers, he said, come. And then a helplessness and hopelessness swept over him, and his face went black, and his eyes were sad. Perhaps I should just let them take me. Instantly Joanna was on her feet, and her hand lay on his arm. You have the pearl, she cried hoarsely. Do you think they would take you back alive to say they had stolen it? His hand strayed limply to the place where the pearl was hidden under his clothes. They will find it, he said weakly. Come, she said, come. And when he did not respond, do you think they would let me live? Do you think they would let the little one here live? Her goading struck him into his brain. His lips snarled, and his eyes were fierce again. Come, he said. We will go to the mountains. Maybe we can lose him in the mountains. Frantically, he gathered the gourds and the little bags that were their property. Kino carried a bundle in his left hand, but the big knife swung free in his right. He parted the brush for Joanna, and they hurried to the west, to the high stone mountains. They trotted quickly, through the tangle of the undergrowth. This was panic flight. Kino did not try to conceal his passage as he trotted, kicking the stones, knocking the telltale leaves from the little trees. The high sun streamed down in the dry, creaking earth so that even the vegetation tickled in protest. But ahead were the naked granite mountains, rising out of erosion rubble and standing monolithic against the sky. And Kino ran for the high place, as nearly all animals do when they are pursued. This land was waterless, furred with the cacti which could store water with the great rooted brush which could reach deep into the earth for a little moisture and get along on very little. And underfoot was not soil but broken rock, split into small cubes, great slabs, but none of it water rounded. Little tufts of sad dry grass grew between the stones. Grass had been sprouted with one single rain, and headed, dropped its seed, and died. Horned toads watched the family go by, and turned their little pivoting dragon heads. And now and then a great jackrabbit, disturbed in its shade, bumped away, and hid behind the nearest rock. The singing heat lay over this desert country, and ahead the stone mountains looked cool and welcoming. As Kino fled, he knew what would happen. A little way along the road, the trackers would become aware that they had missed the path. They would come back, searching and judging, and in a little while they would find the place where Kino and Ioana had rested. From there it would be easy for them. Those little stones, the fallen leaves, the whipped branches, the scuffled places where the foot had slipped. Kino could see them in his mind, slipping upon the track, whining a little with eagerness, and behind him, dark and half disinterested, the horseman with his rifle. His work would come last, for he would not take them back. Oh, the music of evil sang loud in Kino's head now. It sang with the whine of heat, with the dry ringing of snake rattles. It was not large and overwhelming now, but secret and poisonous. And the pounding of his heart gave it an undertone and rhythm. The wave began to rise, as it did with the rocks, grew larger. But now Kino had put a little distance between the family and the trackers. Now on the first rise he rested. He climbed a great boulder and looked back over the shimmering country, and he could not see his enemies, not even tall horsemen riding through the brush. Ioana had squatted in the shade of the boulder. She raised her bottle of water to Coyotito's lips. His little dried tongue sucked greedily at it, and she looked up at Kino when he came back. She saw him examine her ankles, cut and scratched from the stones and brush. She quickly covered them with her skirt. Then she handed the bottle to him, and he shook his head. Her eyes were bright in her tired face. Kino moistened his cracked lips with his tongue. "Ioana," he said, "I will go on, and you will hide. I will lead them into the mountains, and when they have gone past, we will go north to Loreto, or Santana Rosaria. Then, if I can escape them, I will come to you. It is the only safe way." She looked full into his eyes for a moment. "No," she said. "We go with you." "I can go faster alone," he said harshly. "You will put the little one in more danger if you go with me." "No," said Ioana. "You must. It is a wise thing, and it is my wish," he said. "No," said Ioana. He looked then for weakness in her face, for fear or irresolution, and there was none. Her eyes were very bright. He shrugged his shoulders helplessly then, but he had taken strength from her. When they moved on, it was no longer panic flight. The country, as it rose towards the mountains, changed rapidly. Now there were long outcroppings of granite, with dark crevices between, and Kino walked on bare unmarkable stone when he could, and leapt from ledge to ledge. He knew that wherever the trackers lost his path, they might circle and lose time before they found it again, and so he did not go straight for the mountains any more. He moved in zigzags, and sometimes he cut back to the south, and left a sign, and then went towards the mountains, or over bare stone again. And the path rose steeply now, so that he panted a little as he went. The sun moved downwards toward the bare stone teeth of the mountains, and Kino set his direction for a dark and shadowy cleft in the range. If there was any water at all, it would be there, where he could see, even in the distance, a hint of foliage. And if there was any passage to the smooth stone range, it would be by this same deep cleft. It had its danger, for the trackers would think of it too, but the empty water bottle did not let that consideration enter. And the sun lowered. Kino and Ioana struggled wearily up the steep slope toward the cleft. High in the grey stone mountains, under a frowning peak, a little spring bubbled out of the rupture in the stone. It was fed by shade-preserved snow in the summer, and now and then it died completely, and bare rocks and dry algae were on its bottom. but nearly always it gushed out, cold and clean and lovely. In the times when the quick rains fell, it might become a freshet and send its column of white water crashing down the mountain cleft. But nearly always it was a lean little spring. It bubbled out into a pool, and then fell 100 feet into another pool, and this one, overflowing, dropped again, so as it continued down and down till it came to the rubble of the upland, and there disappeared altogether. There wasn't much left of it then, anyway, for each time it fell over an escapement, the thirsty air drank it, and it splashed from the ponds to dry vegetation. The animals from miles around came to drink from the little pools, and the wild sheep and the deer, the pumas and raccoons, and the mice all came to drink. And the birds, which spent the day in the brushland, came at night, the little pools that were there that were like little steps in the mountain cleft. Besides this tiny stream, wherever enough earth collected for root holds, colonies of plants grew: wild grape, little palms, maidenhair fern, hibiscus, and tall pampas grass, with feathery rods raised above the spike leaves. And in the pool lived frogs and water skaters, and water worms crawled on the bottom of the pool. Everything that loved water came to these few shallow places. The cats took their prey here, and strewed feathers and lapped water through their bloody teeth. Little pools were places of life because of the water, places of killing because of the water too. The lowest step, where the stream collected before it tumbled down 100 feet and disappeared into the rubbly desert, was a little platform of stone and sand. Only a pencil of water fell into the pool, but it was enough to keep the pool full, and to keep the ferns green in the underhang of the cliff, and the wild grape climbed Stone Mountain, and all manner of little plants found comfort here. The freshets had made a small sandy beach through which the pool flowed, and bright green watercress grew in the damp sand. The beach was cut and scarred and paddled by the feet of animals that had come to drink and to hunt. The sun had passed over the stone mountains when Kino and Joanna struggled up the steep, broken slope and came out last to the water. From the step, they could look over the sun-beaten desert to the blue gulf in the distance. They came utterly weary to the pool, and Joanna slumped to her knees and first washed Coyotito's face, and then filled her bottle and gave him a drink. And the baby was weary and petulant, and he cried softly until Joanna gave him her breast, and then he gurgled and clucked against her. Kino drank long and thirstily at the pool. For a moment then, he stretched out beside the water and relaxed all his muscles, and watched Joanna feeding the baby. And then he got to his feet and went to the edge of the step where the water slipped over, and he searched the distance carefully. His eyes set on a point, and he became rigid. Far down the slope he could see the two trackers. They were little more than dots or scurrying ants, and behind them a larger ant. Joanna had turned to look at him, and she saw his back stiffen. "How far?" she asked quietly. "They will be here by evening," said Kino. He looked up the long, steep chimney of the cleft where the water came down. "We must go west," he said, and his eyes searched the stone's shoulder behind the cleft. And 30 feet up on the gray shoulder he saw the series of little erosion caves. He slipped off his sandals and clambered up onto them, gripping the bare stone with his toes, and he looked into the shallow caves. They were only a few feet deep, wind-hollowed scoops, but they sloped slightly downward and back. Kino crawled into the largest one and lay down, and knew he could not be seen from the outside. Quickly he went back to Joanna. "You must go up here. Perhaps they will not find us there," he said. Without question, she filled up her water bottle to the top, and Kino helped her up to the shallow cave and brought up the packages of food and passed them to her. And Joanna sat in the cave entrance and watched him. She saw that he did not try to erase their tracks in the sand. Instead, he climbed up at the brush cliff beside the water, clawing and tearing at the ferns and wild grape as he went. And when he had climbed 100 feet to the next beach, he came down again. He looked carefully at the smooth rock shoulder towards the cave to see there was no trace of passage, and at last he climbed up and crept into the cave beside Joanna. "When they go up," he said, "we will slip away, down the lowlands again. I'm afraid only that the baby may cry. You must see that the baby does not cry." "He will not cry," she said, and she raised the baby's face to her own and looked into his eyes, and he stared solemnly back at her. "He knows," said Joanna. Now Kino lay in the cave entrance, his chin braced on his crossed arms, and he watched the blue shadow of the mountain move out across the brushy desert below until it reached the gulf, and the long twilight of the shadow was over the land. The trackers were long in coming. as though they had trouble with the trail Kino had left. It was dusk when they came at last to the little pool, and all three were on foot now, for a horse could not climb the last steep slope. From above they were thin figures in the evening. The two trackers scurried about on the little beach and saw Kino's progress up the cliff before they drank. The man with the rifle sat down and rested himself, and the trackers squatted near him, and in the evening the points of their cigarettes glowed and receded. And then Kino could see that they were eating, and the soft murmur of their voices came to him. Then darkness fell, deep and black in the mountain cleft. The animals that used the pool came near, smelled men there, and drifted away again into the darkness. He heard a murmur behind him. Joanna was whispering, "Coyotito." She was begging him to be quiet. Kino heard the baby whimper, and he knew from the muffled sounds that Joanna had covered his head in her shawl. Down the beach a match flared, and in its momentary light Kino saw that two of the men were sleeping, curled up like dogs, while a third watched. He saw the glint of the rifle in the match of light. And then the match died, but it left a picture on Kino's eyes. He could see it, just how each man was, two sleeping, curled up, the third squatting in the sand with the rifle between his knees. Kino moved silently back into the cave. Joanna's eyes were two sparks reflecting a low star. Kino crawled quietly close to her, and he put his lips near her cheek. "There is a way," he said, "but they will kill you." "If I get first to the one with the rifle," Kino said, "I must get to him first. Then I will be all right. To our sleeping." Her hand crept out from under her shawl and gripped his arm. "They will see your white clothes in the starlight." "No," he said, "and I must go before moonrise." He searched for a soft word and gave it up. "If they kill me," he said, "lie quietly, and when they are gone away, go to Loreto." Her hand shook a little, holding his wrist. "There is no choice," he said. "It is the only way. They will find us in the morning." Her voice trembled a little. "Go with God," she said. He peered closely at her and could see her large eyes. His hand fumbled out and found the baby. For a moment his palm lay on Coyotito's head, and then Kino raised his hand and touched Joanna's cheek, and she held her breath. Against the sky in the cave entrance, Joanna could see that Kino was taking off his white clothes. For dirty and ragged as though they would show up against the dark night. His own brown skin was a better protection for him. Then she saw how he hooked his amulet neck string about the horn handle of his great knife, so it hung down in front of him and left both hands free. He did not come back to her. For a moment his body was black in the cave entrance, crouched and silent, and then he was gone. Joanna moved to the entrance and looked out. She peered like an owl from the hole in the mountain, and the baby slept under the blanket on her back. His face turned sideways against her neck and shoulder. She could feel his warm breath under her skin. And Joanna whispered her combination of prayer and magic, her Hail Marys and her ancient intercession against the black, unhuman things. The light seemed a little less stark when she looked out, and to the east there was a lightning in the sky. Down near the horizon where the moon would show, and, looking down, she could see the cigarette of the man on watch. Kino edged like a slow lizard down the smooth rock shoulder. He had turned his neck string so that the great knife hung down from his back and could not clash against the stone. His spread fingers gripped the mountain, and his bare toes found support to the contact, and even his chest lay against the stone so that he would not slip. For any sound, a rolling pebble or a sigh, a slip of the flesh on the rock, would rouse the watchers below. Any sound that was not germane to the night would make them alert. But the night was not silent. The little tree frogs that lived near the stream twittered like birds. The high metallic ringing of the cicadas filled the mountain cleft. And Kino's own music was in his head, the music of the enemy. Low and pulsing, nearly asleep, but the song of the family had become as fierce and sharp and feline as the snarl of a female puma. The family song was now alive and driving him down to the dark enemy. The harsh cicada seemed to take up its melody, and the twittering tree frogs called little phrases of it. And Kino crept silently as a shadow down the smooth mountain face. One bare foot moved a few inches. Toes touched the stone and gripped. The other foot a few inches, and then the palm of one hand a little downward, and then the other hand, until the whole body, without seeming to move, had moved. Kino's mouth was open, so that even his breath would make no sound, for he knew he was not invisible. If the watcher, sensing movement, looked at the dark place against the stone which was his body, he could see him. Kino must move so slowly that he would not draw the watcher's eyes. It took him a long time to reach the bottom, and to crouch behind a little dwarf palm. His heart thundered in his chest, and his hands and face were wet with sweat. He crouched and took great, long breaths to calm himself. Only 20 feet separated him from the enemy now, and he tried to remember the ground between. Was there any stone which might trip him in his rush? He kneaded his legs against cramp and found his muscles were jerking after the long tension. And then he looked apprehensively to the east. The moon would rise in a few moments now. He must attack before it rose. He could see the outline of the Watcher, but the sleeping men were below his vision, and the Watcher Kino must find. It must find quickly without hesitation. Silently, he drew the amulet string over his shoulder and loosened the loop from the horn handle of his great knife. He was too late, for as he rose from his crouch, the silver edge of the moon slipped above the eastern horizon, and Kino sank back behind his brush. It was an old and ragged moon, but it threw a hard light and hard shadow onto the mountain cleft, and now Kino could see the seated figure of the Watcher on his little beach beside the pool. The Watcher gazed full at the moon, and then he lighted another cigarette, and the match illuminated the dark face for a moment. There could be no waiting now. When the Watcher turned his head, Kino must leap. His legs were as tight as wound springs, and then from above came a little murmuring cry. The Watcher turned his head to listen, and then he stood up, and one of the sleepers stirred on the ground and awakened, and quietly asked, "What is it?" "I don't know," said the Watcher. "It sounded like a cry, almost like a human, like a baby." The man who had been sleeping said, "You can't tell. Some coyote bitch with a litter. I've heard a coyote pup cry like a baby." The sweat rolled in drops around Kino's forehead and fell into his eyes and burned them. So the little cry came again, and the Watcher looked up the side of the hill to the dark cave. "Coyote, maybe," he said, and Kino heard the harsh click as he cocked his rifle. "If it's a coyote, this will start," the Watcher said, and he raised the gun. Kino was in mid-leap when the gun crashed, and the barrel flash made a picture in his eyes. The great knife swung and crunched hollowly. It bit through the neck and deep into the chest, and Kino was a terrible machine now. He grasped the rifle even as he wrenched free his knife. His strength and his movement and his speed were a machine. He whirled and struck at the head of the seated man like a melon. The third man scrabbled away like a crab, slipped into the pool, climbed frantically to climb up the cliff where the water penciled down. His hands and feet threshed and entangled the wild grapevine, and he whimpered and gibbered as he tried to get up. But Kino had become as cold and deadly as steel. Deliberately, he threw the lever of the rifle, and he raised the gun and aimed deliberately and fired. He saw his enemy tumble backward into the pool, and Kino strode to the water. In the moonlight, he could see the frantic, frightened eyes, and Kino aimed and fired between those eyes. And then Kino stood uncertainly. Something was wrong. Some signal was trying to get through his brain. Tree frogs and cicadas were silent now, and then Kino's brain cleared from its red concentration, and he knew the sound. The keening, moaning, raising, hysterical cry from the little cave in the side of the stone mountain. The cry of death. Everyone in La Paz remembers the return of the family. There may be some old ones who saw it. Those whose fathers and whose grandfathers told it to them remember it nevertheless. It is an event that happened to everyone. It was late in the golden afternoon when the first little boys ran hysterically in the town to spread the word that Kino and Joanna were coming back. And everyone hurried to see them. The sun was setting towards the western mountains, and the shadows on the ground were long, and perhaps that was what left a deep impression on those who saw them. The two came from the rutted country road onto the city, and they were not walking in single file, Kino ahead and Joanna behind, as usual, but side by side. The sun was behind them, and their long shadows stalked ahead, and they seemed to carry 2 towers of darkness with them. Kino had a rifle across his arm, and Joanna carried her shawl, like a sack over her shoulder, and in it was a small, limp, heavy bundle. The shawl was crusted with dried blood, and the bundle swayed a little as she walked. Her face was hard and lined and leathery with fatigue and with tightness with which she fought fatigue, and her wide eyes stared inward on herself. She was as remote and as removed as heaven. Kino's lips were thin and his jaw tight, and the people say that he carried fear with him, that he was as dangerous as a rising storm. The people say that the two seemed to be removed from human experience, that they had gone through the pain and come out on the other side, that they were almost a magical protection about them. and those people who had rushed to see them crowded back and let them pass, and did not speak to them. Kino and Joanna walked through the city as though it were not there. Their eyes glanced neither right nor left, nor up nor down, but stared only straight ahead. Their legs moved a little jerkily, like well-made wooden dolls, and they carried pillars of black fear about them. And as they walked through the stone and plaster city, brokers peered at them from barred windows, and servants put one eye to a slitted gate, and mothers turned their faces of the youngest children inward against their skirts. Kino and Joanna strode side by side to the stone and plaster city, and down among the brush houses, and the neighbors stood back and let them pass. Juan Thomas raised his hand in greeting, and did not say the greeting, and left his hand in the air for a moment, uncertainly. In Kino's ears the song of the family was as fierce as a cry. He was immune and terrible, and his song had become a battle cry. They trudged past the burned square, where their house had been without even looking at it. They cleared the brush that edged the beach and picked their way down to shore toward the water. They did not look towards Kino's broken canoe. And when they came out to the water's edge, they stopped and stared out over the gulf. And then Kino laid the rifle down, and he dug among his clothes. Then he held the great pearl in his hand. He looked to its surface, and it was gray and ulcerous. Evil faces peered from it onto his eyes, and he saw the light of burning. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw the frantic eyes of the man in the pearl. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw Coyotito, laying in a little cave, the top of his head shot away. And the pearl was ugly. It was gray, like a malignant growth. And Kino heard the music of the pearl, distorted and insane. Kino's hand shook a little, and he turned slowly to Joanna, and held the pearl out to her. She stood beside him, still holding her dead bundle over her shoulder. She looked at the pearl in his hand for a moment, and then she looked into Kino's eyes and said softly, "No, you." And Kino drew back his arm and flung the pearl with all his might. Kino and Joanna watched it go, winking and glimmering under the setting sun. They saw a little splash in the distance, and they stood side by side, watching the place for a long time. And the pearl settled into the lovely green water and dropped down towards the bottom. The waving branches of the algae called to it and beckoned to it. The lights on its surface were green and lovely. It settled down to the sand bottom among the fern-like plants. Above the surface of the water was a green mirror, and the pearl lay on the floor of the sea. A crab scampered over the bottom, raised a little cloud of sand, and when it settled, the pearl was gone. And the music of the pearl drifted to a whisper and disappeared.